am. Yeah.
I'm young, brother. I am 53 years young. My name is Victor. I'm president of the American Society of Barcelona, CEO of the Metropolitan Magazine. It's been around for 27 years in Barcelona, covering lifestyle issues. And one of the things that's always very important is politics, how it shapes and affects the lives of people. But I'm actually a huge fan of the fact that you guys have this movement to engage young people to get engaged in politics. You guys are going to inherit all the faults that my generation is passing on to yours. And I love to see you guys get involved, all sides of the spectrum. But I also happen to be president of the Democrats Abroad here in Barcelona, after being a lifelong Republican and president of the College of Republicans at the University of Maryland and the University of Pennsylvania. I'm now head of the Barcelona Democratic chapter. So I'd like to hear what you guys have to say, and if I can be a support, count on it. If you ask for something and it's in my power to give, Albert knows that I want to give it. I don't know what you wanted me to say, but that's what I have to say here. I'm going to go on mute and listen to you wise young people speak.
Okay, so everyone has introduced themselves now. So now you've got the floor, Katie. You can start presenting.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the introduction. And also, Victor, it's nice to see you here too. I know I've been exchanging emails with you a little bit. Can you guys all hear me okay? It's just fine? Okay, well, I just want to start off the presentation by thanking you all for having me come and speak at the Young Politicians Convention. Kind of like what Victor was saying is that I'm very impressed with the work that you guys are doing. And it is so important that young people are getting involved with politics, using their voices, educating themselves on so many different issues. And it seems like your organization would be covering different issues. I know last week was a big one. This one is a different one as well. So to be able to cover many different areas of international relations and politics and everything in between is really exciting and very important. So I'm already very impressed with you guys, and thanks for having the courage to introduce yourselves and share a little bit about what you hope to do in the future. So as Albert said, my name is Katie, and I'm an outreach coordinator at an international school in Denmark called DRH Linderschool. Yes, so in today's presentation, I will be speaking about American race relations, as well as sharing a little bit about the programs that we have at DRH Linderschool. So we'll just go ahead and dive right in then. An introduction of myself. Basically, ever since I was young, I was very interested in political science, history, and traveling. And during high school, probably around your guys' age, actually, I had an internship at the Minnesota State Capitol, covering the legislative session. So it's something that I too was very interested in from a young age. After high school, I took a gap year and studied abroad in Denmark, where I spent a year at a high school there, learning the language. And this is something that really changed my life. So I'm a big believer in gap years, and I'm excited to talk to you about that today. And then after my my gap year, I had my undergraduate in a Bachelor of Science in Social Science. I studied political science, psychology, and sociology. After that, I ended up teaching English in Dubai before going on to get my master's in Development and International Relations with a specialization in Global Refugee Studies. So I studied the most long title possible, but that's what I ended up doing, and I graduated a year ago. My professional background, I worked with NGOs and nonprofits, for instance, the National Eating Disorder Association, Rotary International, not just as a Rotary Exchange student, but also as a Rotarian in Bend, Oregon. And I've also worked at homeless shelters as well. And a little bit about my free time. I write for a paper as a volunteer called The International that bridges the gap between Danes and internationals. I am continuing to study Danish and teach dance on the side to high school students actually in Danish. So it's a great way to also work on the language a little bit. Just to confirm, I can only see my screen. Are you guys able to see me at all when I speak, or is it just the screen?
I can see both you and me.
Okay. Well, I can't see me, so I'll continue with the screen. So if I'm looking in kind of strange positions, that would be why. But going on to the positionality, this is something that's really important to talk about when talking about race relations in an American context. So my intersecting identities, I am from Minnesota. I am a 29-year-old female. I'm white, and all of these different identities, also growing up in the suburbs, make me who I am. And I work very hard to be an anti-racist, something that I'll talk about today. So when I was growing up in the US, I'm from the state of Minnesota. I'm not sure where Victor's from originally, but I'm from Minneapolis, St. Paul. So you can see the Navy state that's up kind of by where Canada would be. And a few lessons that I learned is that in school, I grew up being taught the romanticized view that the United States is a melting pot. It's a space that welcomes people from around the world, where diverse cultures and ethnicities come together to form one united society. So that's one thing that I learned. And along with this, I learned that to be racist is an ugly, ugly thing, yet somehow racism still exists around the world. And very quickly, I want to go into the history of Minnesota as well, or the breakdown essentially. And in Minnesota, there are a lot of, it's a primarily white state in the sense that about 70% are white. There's a lot of German and Scandinavian heritage there. That's my own heritage as well. And although there's a lot of diversity in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, the surrounding suburbs, again, where I grew up, are predominantly white. And something that I learned when doing my thesis is that this is not accidental, and this had to do with redlining and racial covenants of the 1940s. So again, going with those two views that the US is a melting pot and to be racist is a very, very ugly thing. I have a question for you guys, so feel free to answer this. But when you think about racism, what do you think of? And again, I can't see who, so if anyone wants to answer.
Republicans.
Okay. Anyone else?
Elena, go ahead.
I would say maybe discrimination based on like solely the place of origin or ethnicity.
Good. Okay. Okay. And I also heard the word discrimination. I want to ask, what's the difference between racism, discrimination, and prejudice?
Ika, I think you wanted to answer.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh no, it's because like people are raising their hands, but y'all can just speak right off the bat. Like you don't have to raise your hand because like Katie cannot see you. So
I can't see. I really wish I could see you because that'd be a lot more engaging.
The way I understand it is prejudice and discrimination both go into racism. So it kind of, someone who is being racist is they have a prejudice or they discriminate against someone. So it's like kind of the idea of stereotyping someone based on their race.
Okay. Are there others?
anyone else?
I would say misinformation and falsehood and mistaken belief, but to some extent, also I think about protection because racism has discriminated to ethnic groups that to some extent had prevented dangerous action between.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Was that a hand as well, or should I go on to the next slide?
Yeah, regarding racism, I also find some topics very interesting because some of us, like some people are admittedly racist, like they know they're actually racist, but some other people, like even us, even if we don't consider ourselves racist or the society in general, due to stereotypes and many other factors, we already think of our race as something or something else unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
Viva.
I want to agree with Isabel a little bit there, but I also want to add on that I feel like that a lot of our like discriminatory views or actions or whatever someone might say and do stems from the bias that they were taught growing up, wherever they may have lived, as well as just their entire like life experiences. That's why I wanted just to say that a lot of racism can stem from the bias and discriminatory views that they've had since they were little.
Okay. Is that everyone who would like to speak?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. A lot of really, really great ideas, and there's a lot of truth in what you said. And I can also hear that you guys are such intelligent, bright students. So it's really good to hear. I'm going to be taking the definitions from one of my favorite scholars. It's Robin DiAngelo. She's a critical whiteness studies scholar. And on the next slide, I'll explain. What she says is that prejudice is prejudgment about another person based on the social groups to which they belong. And with that, it consists of thoughts and feelings, including stereotypes, attitudes, and generalizations that are based on little or no experience and are then projected onto everyone from that group. So someone who just talked about that, or there was a female who just touched on that, and I think that's where that comes into play, that maybe you're socialized to believe something, that would be the prejudice there. Then discrimination, that would be action based on prejudice. Actions include ignoring, threats, exclusion, ridicule, slander, and violence. And then racism, according to Robin DiAngelo, is that when a racial group's collective prejudice is backed by the power of legal authority and institutional control, then it's transformed to racism. So in this way, it's not only intentional acts of racial discrimination committed by immoral or bad humans, or Republicans, but it is a system of advantage and disadvantage based on race. And I'll use the quote, "Racism is a structure, not an event." So we'll go on to the next one. And I want to ask if you guys are all familiar with George Floyd. I can't see a show of hands, but just a collective yes or no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just kind of going over the facts of the case, essentially. So on May 25th in my home state of Minnesota, 46-year-old George Floyd went into Cut Foods to buy cigarettes with what was assumed to be a $20 counterfeit bill. The police were called and George Floyd was restrained with very aggressive means. For over 9 minutes and 29 seconds, he was restrained by officers face down. And a 17-year-old girl was the one who ended up filming the altercation. And what was one of the most tragic parts about this was that George Floyd had called out for help many different times, and you might have heard or even seen on the screen the words, "I can't breathe." That was said 27 times before he ended up losing his life. So this murder was one of the ugliest things that has ever happened to the state of Minnesota. And it was an event that momentarily united the world in outrage, as it should have, and sparked the greatest social movement to happen to my country since the civil rights movement. So some stats for you. There were over 26 million protesters that hit the streets in 550 American cities. Demonstrations occurred in all 50 states, 40 cities instated curfews, 62,000 National Guard troops were deployed. International protests occurred in over 60 countries worldwide, including Spain. And I saw that Barcelona and Madrid both had protests as well. And something that I should have said from the beginning was that what I ended up writing my master's thesis on was the experiences and lived experiences of the individuals who are in George Floyd Square. So the businesses, the community members, it was their experiences 2 years after the event had occurred. And essentially when I had spoke to them, they had said that for them, it was almost a perfect storm of factors that all contributed to having an event just like this. Because it's so tragic, but this group of people has been discriminated against for centuries, and for this specific case to go viral like this and to cause such a stir like what we see on the screen, I want to ask you guys what you think actually caused such an intense response. Do you have any ideas?
I can go first. I think it was more like it was already like a bomb ticking, you know.
Mhm.
People have already experienced racism, they didn't like it, but perhaps the George Floyd incident, although some people argue that it wasn't really like, oh, we shouldn't have done as much protest, it costed the US economy a lot, blah blah blah. It was more like it broke all of like that bubble that was already building up like a balloon, and it just like sparked the whole thing.
Mhm. Yeah, really good. Does anyone else have any ideas?
I wanted to say that I just thought that a lot of a huge factor with the not advertising, but the way that the entire world got involved is partially credited towards the social media aspect of it, definitely, and the filming of the actual event. I believe that it really helped. Um, I think in to get justice at least for the peoples involved. I think that it was a huge factor, and that's probably one of the main reasons.
Yeah, I
Really
agree
good.
with like
Yeah.
Viva and Isabel that it was like an accumulation of events which later on lasted in this case, and getting more into the legal like part of it. Also, like the policeman had like no like legal like guarantee to go and attack them. Like he just found them and he repeatedly like said that he couldn't breathe. As you said, it was I believe like 23 times, and that's already a very big aggravating factor since the person that is being like held is constantly complaining that like the like person is like doing like an inefficient job and taking them into like commissary, so already has like no legal basis, so it can't be justifiable. And plus social media, it already like created like a bomb of like protests.
How about let's take one more?
I think what kind of happened here is it was like a buildup of years and years and years of like unhappiness, and kind of people were able to turn the situation again, as like everyone else mentioned, thanks to social media. They were able to kind of finally call attention to it and like actually have a worldwide movement.
Yeah, these are some really good points, and thank you everyone for sharing. It ticked quite a few of the points that I was going to present. Oh, did I hear one more person want to say something?
You did.
Oh yeah, add on to the accumulation of various factors, including class struggle, economic disadvantage,
Mhm.
and how about blacks being suppressed by whites for a century long, and also plus on I believe there is a bit of a paranoid inside between in the black community, because the black community is not the norm in only situated in the United States, but in all other nations with black population as well. So black can really link with this idea, and thus created a such massive protest.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, thank you for adding that as well. It's absolutely true. A couple more points I would add on top of social media, and then the breaking point. In Minnesota, the time of the year. Victor, you might be aware of the Midwest. Where are you from, Victor?
Originally Mexico City, but I lived in California as well as in Washington, D.C. for my formative years. And
Okay, okay. Okay, so you have experienced the cold then. Minnesota is traditionally known as a very, very cold state, but in the summertime, it's very warm actually. So that was another factor. But one we didn't hear today yet was COVID-19. Of course, the murder happened in 2020, and people were at home and they were isolated and cooped up for months. And so, and sadly, a lot of people had lost their jobs because of the pandemic. And so when they saw that video, it was also the time for people to come together as well. And because there had been, yeah, stay-at-home orders and everything too. So there was multiple different factors that kind of contributed to what my interlocutors called a perfect storm of factors. But one thing I knew, or I learned from doing my field work, and that's something that's not so well known, is that George Floyd and Derek Chauvin actually knew each other and they had worked with each other previously. So some of the individuals I spoke with in George Floyd Square, they had shared that it wasn't a cordial relationship. And so it's possible that what had happened wasn't actually a racial issue. Perhaps it was just interpersonal conflict gone wrong. However, when we see what had happened, like if we look at the images on the slide right now and across the world, what people saw was a symbol of racism. It was a symbol of, you're right, what you had just said, a breaking point. And it showed just how deeply troubled race relations were and are in the US. And it wasn't just that George Floyd was murdered in a deeply disturbing way, but it was also that this group of Americans have been continuously subjected to racism every single day in one way or another, and had been for hundreds of years. So many people saw themselves, their brothers, their fathers, their friends, as George Floyd was a symbol for them. So that also kind of echoing what you guys had said too, also created this perfect storm, or someone had said a bomb ticking. If we go into the history, again, I can't do it justice, but the racism across the years from being forced into slavery, and the legal systemic racism in the Supreme Court case of Plessy versus Ferguson, where Black Americans had separated facilities, although they were deemed separate but equal, to the mass incarceration of today and the police brutality of today. Black Americans as a group have been subjected to overt and covert racism for far too long, and this had led to a boiling point. So going into the next slide, this is an image, or both of these are images of George Floyd Square, where I ended up doing my field work. I spent about a month there, again, interviewing different members of the community, the businesses, the activists there. On the right-hand side, you can see there's something that says Way. It's a gas station that has been turned into what's called the People's Way. And so every day, twice a day, a group of activists get together. They talk about issues, and they're engaged in racial justice, and they supported the teachers that were on strike when I was there. So this is a very active and involved community. And then when we go to the left-hand side, in the very middle of the screen, you can see a list of names, and that was by Mary Mansfield, who is an Indigenous artist, and she created the Morning Passage. So it's a list of over 100 different names of Black Americans who have been killed due to police brutality. So George Floyd Square, it's just a block or two radius, closed in by a grass fist at every entrance. It acts as kind of this like autonomous square essentially, and it's self-running. The police, at least when I were there, or when I was there, they didn't always come. All these different things, and so it's a very unique space. So I just wanted to share that as well. But after the murder of George Floyd, Minnesota was kind of, it had a magnifying glass put to it essentially. So the NAACP, it released a report essentially saying that Minnesota is one of the best places to live if you are white, but one of the worst if you are Black. They said Minnesota's racial disparities are among the worst in the nation in every key indicator of quality of life. That's employment, education, criminal justice, juvenile justice, income, poverty, home ownership, and health. And they call it the Minnesotan paradox. So this is just something to kind of reflect not just in Minnesota, but also across the US, that this is a very big issue as well. So in the next slide, this is a photo that I took during my time there. And I just want to end this by saying that there's a true racial issue in Minnesota, one that's entirely systemic and structural. But in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, the nation and the international community was able to come together to denounce racism in all forms and demand systemic change. This happened in Minneapolis, it happened in Minnesota, and the US and internationally as well. And today, over 3 years after the murder of George Floyd Square functions again as an autonomous zone consisting of businesses, activists, and tourists. And it's also a space for mourners. It's a space of protest as much as it's a space of healing, a space where people can come together to pay their respects. It's a space to never forget not just what happened to George Floyd,
but to Black people throughout American history. And lastly, it's a space that serves as a reminder that change needs to happen. But change comes not from turning a blind eye or sticking with the status quo. Change comes from listening to voices of color, educating yourselves on these very real issues, and getting politically active. And although, today's presentation focused on racism within an American or Minnesotan context, I encourage you guys as the Young Politicians Committee or Convention to consider the topic of race relations in your own country's context, and again, to get involved because you can be a part of building a better future for not just yourselves, but for others as well. The very next slide, I have a list of resources I'd be happy to share afterwards. But otherwise, I think I'm going to open it up to questions, but then I'm going to try to see you because it's very odd not looking at you when I'm talking. Okay, there you guys are. Hi.
Any questions, people? Yes, Aletta.
Okay, so my question is like, I believe at one point you talked about like the Minnesotan like paradox, and my question is, why is it found to be a paradox? Because for me, a paradox is kind of something which is unreal, but like as you explained, you like based it on statistics, so it is something that is happening. So then why is it called a paradox?
That's a really good question. So essentially it's because there's two realities. In the report, they also talked about having two Minnesotas. There's a white Minnesota where you have access, you have the ability to pursue a higher education, you have generational wealth, you have all these things that have historical influences as well. But then there's also a Black America or a Black Minnesota that has different realities. So that's why it's called the paradox. And yeah, I have some more statistics on that, but looks like Isabel has another question. Yeah.
So there's some people that argue that one of the large reasons many countries are, let's say, there's a lot of racism in many countries is because the people are racist or stereotypical against like their own race. What is your opinion on that?
I think from the studies that I've done and from the readings I've done, I would agree with the statement that I think, at least in the American context, that everyone is racist in the sense that that's how we are socialized in schools, from conversations. There's this really, really great book called Nice Racism, and I would recommend you guys checking that out. It's also by Robin DiAngelo, and it talks about the moves of white progressives as well, ways that you think you're being nice, and this is something with Minnesota as well, that we have a reputation of being very nice. But then in the South, you have a reputation for being extremely racist. But racism happens at all different levels. It can be violent acts, but it can also be silence. It can be not doing anything. It could be smiling too much when you're, interacting with someone of a different background. All these different things, all these different microaggressions, they all kind of encapsulate being socialized into a white supremacist society.
Yeah, Viva.
Hi. Okay. So in your opinion, in the US, obviously you just talked about it. Like in the South, it's obviously perceived as more racist, and you can tend to meet people that have those beliefs more so than anywhere else, really. But if you were to compare maybe like the United States and like Europe, where would you say from just obviously you have been in Denmark a lot, as you said, but where do you think would be one of the more stereotypical racist place, and why? If you, I don't know, if you know.
I think stereotypically people think of the South, also because of history that shows, but also I think that arguably, in the US, even in the North, we have issues as well. In Denmark, there are also some issues. We have some of the strictest immigration policies in Europe, and opportunities are also lacking for certain groups of people. So I think, unfortunately, this is an issue that is around the world, and that also is linked to history, to colonization, and we live in a post-colonial era now, and so there's still waves that are coming ashore from things that have happened historically, and that's why we need to get together to make these changes as well. Yeah, Chen?
Hello, Miss. So I have two questions. The first one is like, do you consider the role of George being overly concentrated and overly celebrated in this event?
Did you say you had two questions, or sorry?
Yeah, this is my first question.
Okay. I think the way I'm going to answer this is I think that people saw themselves in him. So I'm just echoing voices that I had from the interviews that I did. And a lot of people, they saw him as their brother, their father, their neighbor. And it's an issue that is reflected and is so normal for people of color to be discriminated against. And in my interviews, they had also talked about not just what had happened to him, but they gave personal examples of everyday racism that they face. For instance, driving or teaching one's son how to drive a car, the necessary steps to be able to be safe, to saying a prayer before starting the car, just because of how someone looks, all of these different things. So I don't know if he's overly done in that sense, but I think people, they see a man who lost his life to a system that is unfair and unjust and needs to change.
And do you think that character is switchable if other person can substitute his role?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, I think if this had happened to, do you mean racially, or do you mean if there was just a different person?
Like as to ignite a powder keg in the United States, in the context of that.
I think that a lot of people identified with him as a Black man in the sense. So I don't know if had he been of a different ethnicity, if this would have ignited such a response. But I think people, again, with all the perfect storm of factors from historic influence, from COVID, from social media, all of these different things, they kind of all fed into making it what it was.
And the second question is like, do you consider this movement as a seizure of human right, or do you think other words better than seizure?
I'm sorry, what was the word?
Seizure of human right.
I mean, it would be civil rights within this context, but I think it encapsulates everything as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think you answered.
Okay, I see that Victoria has a question as well.
Yeah, so my question is that you said that racism, like, it's also like the smallest things, like smiling too much when you're talking to someone of a different race. So in your opinion, would it even be possible to solve like the issue of racism, or is it like something that's embedded so much in human character that it's kind of there for good?
You know, I think I'm going to direct this to reading and hearing voices of color. I think they'd be the best ones to be able to answer this. But from what I've read and from what I've studied and what I've heard, I think it's so embedded. And I just think of one gentleman who I spoke with, and he was just saying that, I mean, this keeps happening. Like already when there was the trial, then another person was killed by the Minneapolis police, essentially. So it's something that's ongoing. It's something that won't change in my generation. It's something that needs to be changed and to be, I mean, we all have to do our part to try to make the world a better place for everyone. Yeah.
I think Elena was next, maybe.
Okay, so like my question is, that based on what you said, I kind of got like the idea that like racism is kind of like evolving to like, because now we identify other types of like racism. So now racism is evolving into types we cannot identify. And this is connected to the like micro like racism habits that you said. So like my question to you is, how can we like identify this racism evolving, and what differences can we see? So like if we understand kind of the evolution, then we can kind of stop it when it tries to evolve further.
This is actually kind of what I wrote my thesis on, like to a T, essentially. And it's quite a depressing answer from my perspective too. When you have racism and you had slavery, and then that had evolved also to separate but equal, you had that era, and then from there, after the civil rights movement, then it kind of switched to a colorblind society. So then you had to not see race. You had to pretend like people didn't have a different background or had a different experience. But by default, then it was the white racial frame that allowed people to, like the books that you read in school, all these different things, it was a primarily white lens, and taking that as the universal experience. So I would say that after what happened to George Floyd, the colorblind aspect really shattered. And like you said, now it's kind of evolving as well. And so I don't know what it's going to be, but I think it's just important to always continue to educate yourselves. And again, listen to voices that have the lived experience. It's the most important.
Go ahead, Victor.
Okay. I wanted to address a question that Viva put forward, because it's been posed to me many times. As with the American Society, one of our mission is to help integrate, people from other cities, other countries, to come and enjoy life here. And one of the things that does come up is, I didn't know if this is where Viva was going, but something that does come up quite a bit is a comparison between the level of racism here in Europe versus the level of racism in the United States. And when I speak to many Europeans, really, I was shocked at the level of ignorance, or should I say, unawareness of how bad it is here. And I would easily say it's much worse here than it ever was in my experience in the US. Now, and that kind of throws a lot of people off guard. But one of the things that I think is really fascinating about my city, Barcelona, is that I moved here in 1996. Only 1% of the residents who live in this city were not of Spanish nationality. Wow. Only one. And in these last 25 years, it has transformed to almost 30%. And a lot of it comes from Northern Africa. Myself, I've probably spent a good 5-10 years of my life working in and out of sub-Saharan Africa. I hate to say it, but as you're alluding to, Katie, there's tremendous amount of racism everywhere, even within the African communities, the African tribes, whether you're in Latin America with the Aztecs, as far back as you want to go. This is part of, I think, the human condition to try to subject other people, and you find a reason to coalesce about them. But usually the racism, to me, is always seen primarily as if you can identify physical attributes of somebody, you can kind of group them together and they're bad. But one of the things that the Europeans, getting back to Viva's, what I thought was reading between the lines of the question, it was really amazing to see Chinese, Africans, Latin Americans walking down the street of the Ramblas here in Barcelona because they were a novelty. It's okay to have others who are Black or Chinese or different color skin, whatever attributes they were, because they're not a threat to you. As soon as these different, races start marrying your sister, taking jobs that you're competing for, and starting companies that compete with yours, it's an incredibly different ballgame. And one of the things that we do, we do beat ourselves a lot, but not enough, obviously, in the United States about to curb this racism. We do it out in the open. We talk about our problems, whereas here I have found so many people unwilling to acknowledge how bad it is here. And the thing is, they don't really have it as bad unless you're in maybe a bordering country with people of other colors. So Spain and France, Italy, they start to see a lot of the Northern Africans that are coming into the countries, into the continent. You don't see it so far as bad as further north, but the entire basis for, as you would see it, Brexit is racist based. People didn't want other people coming in because they spoke differently, had different things. So I'm kind of going on a tangent here, and I wanted really just to listen. But this is always kind of an interesting question because that is my reality. And maybe it's not yours, Katie, what it's been like in Denmark. But it's been surprising here to see how many people are quite unaware of how powerful racism is right here in this city. And this city has embraced, I think very gracefully, I say that because it almost counters my point, the demographic challenges that have occurred over the last 25 years to change from 1% to 30% is huge. And so anyway, I will say anymore.
Just to respond quickly to that as well, one of my favorite books that I read when researching for my thesis as well was the Civil Rights Chronicles. And there was one specific cartoon of two dogs. It was like a Doberman and some sort of a small fluffy dog. And it was basically like up in the north, we sort of gnaw on them to death in the sense that you have covert racism or you have overt racism or open versus closed. The polite racism, the microaggressions, all these different things, the ignorance, they both are racism at the end of the day. And just to answer your question, yes, Denmark also has the very same issues in that sense too. I'm just going to, there's two more questions, I think, and then we can shift into the second presentation and just do that one as well quite quickly, yeah?
I also had a question. I'll ask
Oh,
it.
okay.
But first, Jordy, because he's been waiting there for a really long time.
Yes.
Good day. This one goes to Katie. So you mentioned a lot like the George Floyd, and I guess also the BLM movement goes tied to it in a way.
Yep.
Don't get me wrong. I do personally believe it's a very important issue that should be, fought for. But do you believe that it has become more of a trademark / business for an elite few to, let's say, suckle from rather than an actual movement? Because that's what it seems to me, truly.
I think you can't say it's all or nothing, but I will say there are elements of that, and some people can see that they have the opportunity to capitalize on it. When I was visiting Minnesota, going to the stores, I saw shirts that said, yeah, Black Lives Matter and all these different things, and then who's gaining financially from those things. But I do think it's a very important movement. It actually didn't start with George Floyd. It started in 2013, but they also saw
it got sparked by it, clearly. It was one of the big, let's say, booms that brought it out to the world. Like, when that happened, it was the headline in all the news.
It was, and it was actually before, too, in 2013. That's when it fully started. It was kind of there leading up to it, but again, with the powder keg and having the world see it, that's when it really got involved. So definitely, yeah, really good point.
Elena, yeah, you go.
Okay. So my question is kind of now, because of internet, more information has gone on of racism, which is positive, but also at the same time, disinformation has started. And one of the main disinformations that I actually see daily, which I'm pretty shocked by, is this idea that they created of cultural appropriation, which I do not know to what extent it can be considered something that should be resolved or a real issue. And basically cultural appropriation is when you get something from another culture and you put it to your own. For example, they really said this with using African braiding style on somebody who is white. They would call that cultural appropriation. But I want to know your opinion in this, because at least my take is that if we were going to fight about everything that other countries have been taking from others, we would basically be fighting about each material. And I just think it's kind of disrespectful to those people who are actually suffering forms aggressive forms of racism and passive forms of racism, and closing their voices into these minor subjects, which I don't really see how it has to do with racism itself. So
I guess just having a personal response, this is just me personally speaking. In my opinion, if you can do something, or you can choose actions that don't hurt others, whether intentionally or unintentionally, then that's the route to go. But I know that there's many people out there who have differences in opinions, and would call someone who has my beliefs a snowflake or that kind of thing as well. I think the most important thing is to educate yourself. And if you say, yeah, if you want to get grades, then maybe look online to see what kind of discussions are out there. And then you can choose for yourself what's the best thing to do. But yeah, for me, it's just anything that could potentially cause harm, unintentionally even, is something to avoid. Yeah. Okay.
And well, my question.
Yes, Albert.
Yeah, so basically I wanted to ask about what is your opinion on there's like many groups of people both here in Europe and in America as well, where they're just like racist to particular groups of immigrants, maybe like who are like, you know, the people of color, for example, but they're not racist towards people of color who are born in their country and like speak the language fluently or whatever, or solely racist to those people of color who are born in, you know, abroad and who afterwards came to this country. Would you classify this as progress because they're not being outwardly racist towards everyone, only some kinds of people, or would you condemn this and say that, I mean, evidently this is unacceptable, but would you think this is progress, or we're still, you know, the problem is still prevalent? What is your opinion?
There's still work to do. Still work to do. And I see that in Denmark as well, where people, maybe their parents or their second, third generation Danes, but they look a certain way, and then they're called a different, where they think they're coming from, essentially. But it's like they speak Danish fluently without an accent. They went to Danish schools. They were born in a Danish hospital. So it's still, I think, something that needs to be looked at. Yeah. But I know I want to be respectful of your time. And today I want to also share a little bit about GRH Linderswold as well. So if there's no more questions.
I think there's another question.
Oh, okay. I know this topic. I am so passionate about it too. So.
Okay, Mark, quickly, and after we go to the offerings. Okay.
So I would like to go back to one of the points you made earlier about how you mentioned that everyday actions such as smiling too much, maybe for example, could be considered in some form racist. Can you please elaborate on that? And also going back to the races, if I'm not mistaken, they were first used by the Vikings, so it's really a black thing. Well, yeah, I'd like to go back to one of your points of how you mentioned that everyday actions such as smiling too much could be considered potentially racist, and that I'd like you to elaborate further on that.
Yeah, okay, so that's going off of the book Nice Racism by Robin DiAngelo. And she talks about the moves of white progressives. So these are people who are with the movement. They're the choir. They completely believe in racial equality and all of these things. And maybe they have a spouse who is Black, and they use that as like, see, I'm not racist, or see, I marched in the 60s, or all of these different things. It's a way to pat yourself on the back and say, I've done the work. So that's just one example of the many that she speaks about in her book, of the small, tiny little microaggressions where it's like, oh, I'm being very nice. See, I'm a nice person. I'm enjoying everyone, and that kind of thing. So I recommend reading her book, and also her first book, White Fragility. It's another very good one. And then also, again, I can share the list of resources from the slide as well. There's lots of good books out there too.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, I'll try to do this one quickly because I know I want to be respectful of your time. How long do these meetings usually last, Albert?
About an hour, but sometimes we go over time because there's a lot of controversy and sometimes people have many opinions, so.
Okay, and I know you guys are students as well, so it's important to get some good rest as well. So I will just go ahead and share my screen, but I might flip through some of the screens or the slides that I have, but now I won't be able to see you again, so goodbye for now. Yes, entire screen share. And present. Okay, so kind of what I was saying earlier too is that I work at an international school in Denmark that focuses on volunteering in different parts of the world. We have programs in different parts of Africa, in Zambia, Malawi. We're working on Mozambique and also in St. Vincent and the Grenadines as well. And what Den Reisende Højskole, or DRH, stands for is a Danish traveling high school. And essentially what the school started with was a group of progressive Danish teachers in the 1970s. And what they ended up doing was saying that the current education system isn't enough. We want to create something that gives the opportunity to see the world, to travel, to have different experiences, and to be able to share that when you return. So they ended up doing that. They got in buses, they traveled and showed were able to experience the world. And so it's the principle of learn to travel, travel to learn. A Danish højskole is something that is very, very Danish, and we don't actually have the kind of equivalent in the US or anywhere else really. And it's essentially this like adult education gap year where if you're over the age of 18, you would be able to go and study different topics with what you're interested in. It could be dance, it could be psychology, and ours focuses on global issues, international relations, and addressing issues such as poverty, climate change, and inequality as well. And another thing is that it's a school for everyone of all different backgrounds, whether you are right out of university or going or right before university or switching careers. It's something that is a place for everyone as well. Our mission statement is nurturing individuals into active global citizens through immersive programs that follow solidarity, learning, and meaningful transformation. We have different values that I want to share, that there's no traditional hierarchy at the school. Everyone works together, from the teachers to the staff members to the students, bringing their own unique backgrounds. So in this case, it's very horizontal as a school. We also focus on empowering our students, so they learn both theoretical and practical skills needed to go into the project period. We also take responsibility and we help our students become skilled problem solvers to find solutions for problems that are big or small. And collective action in the sense that we empower our students to use the knowledge, privilege, and abilities to act collectively and to make a change. In the top photo, you can actually see our headmaster, Tina, presenting. In the very bottom, you can see one of our students, Pedro. At our school, we're in Faxe, Denmark, so we're in the countryside, and we have horses, we have sheep, we have, you name it, all these different types of animals, chickens, goats. So it's a little bit outside of Copenhagen by about 80 kilometers, but it's a very beautiful campus as well. We offer two different programs. We have Volunteer for Change and we have Nature Now. For both programs, they have a training session that's 3 months long, where our students have studies, investigations, and they try to understand the global realities of the country that they're going to be volunteering in. And in terms of the Nature Now program, it's studies and investigations on mitigating global warming and climate change. Then for the next part, you have 6 months of working in a project in Africa and India for Volunteer for Change, and in Nature Now, there'll be 3 months working in the Caribbean. And then the last month of both programs focuses on knowledge sharing, sharing your experiences, kind of going with the theme of what the Danish teachers had done in the 70s. So something about the training program, or the 3-month training period, is that this kind of sets DRH Linderswold apart from other volunteer programs, because something you guys might have been hearing about is voluntourism, where anyone from the global north puts on the hat and says, okay, I'm going to go and be a volunteer in the global south, and I'm going to take my knowledge and my skills, and I'm going to teach other people how to do better, how to live a better life, or all these different things. But the 3-month training period essentially is a holistic training to help our students understand theoretically and practically how to be a ethical volunteer, essentially. So our students have theory, they have courses, lectures, case studies, they watch documentaries, they have discussions. It might be a little bit similar to the group that you guys are a part of. But yes, the theoretical component is very important. In the first photo, you can see actually some of our students right now who are in the Volunteer for Change program, and they were taking a media course. So looking into ways to take ethical photographs, ways to share a story, to be able to make a larger impact with the volunteer work that they're going to do. In just a few weeks, this group will be going to Malawi, so we're really excited for them. The education at Linderswold is also very practical. Again, we have Tina, our headmaster. She's out working in the garden. And part of the Hoy School tradition in Denmark, no matter what school you are in across the country, is that you are a part of running the school. So this could be gardening, it could be caring for the animals, it could be all these different factors, cleaning, kind of caring for your own space, building and repairing, like hands-on skills that would be valuable for when you go to the project, because when you are in a different country, there's no one who's going to make your bed for you. There's no one who's going to cook for you. So these are things that are skills that we help our students to develop as well. And another component of it is that we have investigations that are really interesting. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Humana People to People, but they're our biggest partner and the one that allows us to have our students go to the different projects across different parts of Africa and India. And when we look at the photo on the far right-hand side, we're at the Humana Sorting Center in Denmark. So this is something that our students got to learn about, the effects of the fast fashion industry, talking about sustainable fashion, all these different things. So the whole training period helps our students become ready to do different projects. From there, we have the 3 or 6 month project period for Humana People to People. And those projects for the Volunteer for Change program, that'll be 6 months. And for the Nature Now program, it's 3 months, and you'll be spending your time at Richmond Vale Academy. So I'll come back to that in a second. But it's important to note that for both our programs, the ethics is the highest component, and sustainability is a top priority. With this, we work with local communities and the needs of the local communities. So the projects that I'll be talking about in a minute, how you choose them essentially is that it's going to be a combination of the needs of the local community and then what your interests are as well. But the most important thing is that it's actually valuable to the local community. Yeah. And then finally, we have the knowledge sharing period. And here, there's a picture of students doing a podcast, kind of sharing their experiences. And then we've also had students write blogs, do presentations, all these different things to make a larger impact. And I think what I'm going to do is stop the presentation for now and just show a video, and we can wrap up there. But can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I'll just go ahead and open this and do a full view.
We can't hear anything though, I think.
Oh no.
Is it only me or is it other people as well?
Can no one hear anything?
No, I can't hear anything.
I hear everything.
Oh. Okay, so it's half and half then.
Who hears everything?
The Traveling School for Change.
Oh, you heard it? Oh, okay, I don't know. I don't hear it.
Okay. Can the majority hear, or is it the majority who cannot hear?
I think maybe if it's like an issue of the computers, you could send the link to the video in the chat and we could all watch it individually and then come back.
Yes, that's what I did in grad school too when there were technical issues. You guys are so smart.
Yeah, or actually, I think, Kevin, whenever you present, it always works, like everyone can hear the video. So maybe you could like present the video, like share your screen.
Yeah, I'll be honored.
How do I, okay. Chat box, captions. Okay. Paste. Are you guys able to see the link?
Yeah.
Okay, super.
Yeah, but do I play the video or everyone play individually?
You gotta share the screen. So like if Katie, you can stop sharing the screen now so like Kevin can share the screen. And that way like we can just watch the video now really quickly. No, it's completely fine. Don't worry. Kevin, share the screen whenever you can.
Yeah.
My name's Tina, and I'm headmaster here at DRH Linderswold, the Travelling Folk High School at Linderswold. It's located in Faxe. Faxe is around 80 kilometers south of Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. In the countryside, in a beautiful location, close to the beach, close to the forest. It's actually very nice. We have one program of 10 months. A 3 months training period at Linderswold, building up skills and abilities, working together as a team, and then spending 6 months in a project of Humana People to People. So these projects might be with community work, it might be working with training children in preschools, farming projects, health projects, and they're all interlinked anyway. So if you work with one specific area, you will work with a broad foundation. And then they spend 1 month back again. One of the main things in the program is about the world of people and politics today. It's understanding the conditions for people in the world. It's understanding why people are poor in this or that part of the world. It's about understanding the way the global system is organized today. So it's also going into human rights. It's going into politics, environmental issues. People come here for different reasons. Some come because they want to be part of a community. Others come because they want to change their life. Some others come because they want to change the world. And it's very different, but I mean, the basic is that you're over the age of 18 and that you have a will to use your skills and capacities and surplus to do something that will benefit other people. And by doing that, you will benefit a lot yourself because you just build skills and become more empowered and able and understand the world in better ways than before. Living in a community, it might sound nice and romantic, but it's a work also, and everybody has to work towards the centre. But this means that we develop a more humanistic society, because then we learn to value others for who they are, what they can do, rather than what they cannot do or what's annoying about them. No, who are you? What is good? What are your skills? How can we work together? So I think this sense of community, training, empowerment, that's some of the things why we need schools like this in the world today.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing. For sharing your screen. Just kind of wrapping up, that was for the Volunteer for Change program. We also have the Nature Now program that takes place in the Caribbean, and that would be focusing more on climate projects as opposed to ones focusing on education or public health, those kinds of things. So I hope that gave a little bit of a taste of what it's like. And one final thing to note is that when you do volunteer, you gain a lot of different skills of community development, project management, intercultural communication, and confidence, all these different things. And when you're looking into applying for universities, these are things that are also very valuable to have, and also the worldview to be able to see how things are like in different parts of the world, and to have the holistic education to be able to try to do something about it too. So with that, I'll open the floor for a few questions, but I also want to be respectful of your time because I know it's getting a little bit late too. But if you have any questions, you're welcome to throw them at me.
Also, if anything, you could also provide like your email, perhaps. So if anyone has further questions, they could also email you and
Yeah,
they can answer in. Yeah.
of course, of course. Yeah, I'd be happy to, Albert, I'll send you an email then, and also with the resources for the last presentation so that people can take a look if they're interested. Yeah?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, with that then, I just want to say thank you so much for having me today. I hope the conversation was interesting and the presentation that you have learned something. You guys are such bright students, and I think you are going to do great things with what you do in your future. So I applaud you for what you're doing and keep up the great work. And thanks for your time tonight.
Okay, how about we give Katie a round of applause? Okay,
Thanks, Al.
to wrap it up, thank you so much, Katie, for being here. That you were actually our first guest speaker session, so we're just like trying it out, seeing how it would work out, and I think it's been satisfactory so far. So, thank you very much.
Of course, of course. Well, have a good night, everyone, and take care. And thank you so much. Yeah.
Have a good night, Miss.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Keep rocking.
Bye.
Take care.